Welcome to Raw Online Teaching Program. So today's topic of discussion is going to be about the glomerular diseases which is associated with gross hematuria. So in our previous discussion, we have seen about the general approach to a child with hematuria. So in particularly today we are going to see about the isolated renal disease, that is glomerular causes, which is associated with the gross hematuria. In that too, the most common cause, like 4 conditions, we are going to look in detail. So coming to as a general causes of hematuria, that is glomerular causes, we can classify into isolated renal disease. That is only renal condition with no systemic disturbances. The child is having hematuria only because of renal condition. So in that order, it includes IgA nephropathy, Alport syndrome, thin glomerular basement membrane nephropathy, post-infectious or post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. So these 4 conditions are most commonly seen in the childhood period. And other conditions like membranous nephropathy or membranoproliferative mostly seen in the young children or adolescent age group. And when the condition worsens, it may lead to rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis or FSGS, that is focal segmental glomerular sclerosis. And anti-glomerular basement membrane disease is another entity. And there is another condition which mimics the glomerular cause of hematuria is hereditary angiopathy with nephropathy, aneurysm and muscle cramps, frequently called as HANAC. So these are all the conditions which is associated with isolated renal disease. So next broad heading which causes hematuria is multi-system disease involvement. That is, along with nephritis or nephropathy causing hematuria, the child will be also presenting symptoms with other system involvement like vascular system involvement, or the child will have neurological, ophthalmological system involvement. In that series, mostly common is vasculitis related disorders, that is SLE, Henox-Condon purpura, vaginous, polyarteritis nodosa, Goodpasture syndrome, HUS or sickle cell glomerulopathy, or HIV nephropathy. So these are all the conditions which involves multi-system disease. And third common classification is vascular causes. Like vascular causes, arterial or venous thrombosis or any malformations, most commonly sickle cell trait or the disease, or crystalluria. So these are all vascular conditions causing glomerular cause of gross hematuria. Anatomical disorders like hydronephrosis, polycystic kidney disease or multicystic dysplasia, or tumors like Wilms tumor or rhabdomyosarcoma or trauma. So all these anatomical conditions also cause hematuria. So these are all the broad category of the child causing glomerular cause of hematuria. So in that, today's topic of discussion is only on isolated renal disease that results in hematuria. That too, most common causes IgA nephropathy, Alports, thin glomerular basement membrane, and post-infectious or post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. So this is going to be our discussion part today. So coming to the gross hematuria. So when you see a child with gross hematuria or a recurrent cause of gross hematuria, so in general, it is seen that following upper URI, that is upper respiratory tract infection, or following any skin infection, generally the child may develop hematuria either within 1 to 2 days of onset of URI or between 7 to 21 days, that is almost a week to 3 weeks later after the URI or skin infection. So depending upon the time of onset, whether it is an early onset or it is little bit delayed, following a upper respiratory infection or a skin infection, you can able to, at least to some extent, you can able to suggest a possible likely diagnosis. That is, when the hematuria is followed by an URI within 1 to 2 days of onset, then likely diagnosis will be IgA nephropathy. Okay. When it takes little bit longer time, let us a week or 3 weeks later following a URI or a skin infection, if it develops, then most likely diagnosis to be post-streptococcal glomerular nephritis. So the most clinching laboratory investigation or biochemical parameter is the serum complement C3 levels. The C3 levels will be normal here in IgA nephropathy, and it is markedly reduced in PSGN C3 levels. And if you see the resolution, usually IgA nephropathy resolves in 2 to 5 days duration, and this will take little longer. It resolves generally in 4 to 6 weeks. So before going into an individual disease per se, this is a general approach, like based upon the onset of hematuria following a URI, you may be able to suggest a likely diagnosis, whether it is IgA nephropathy or PSGN. So in further discussion, we will be looking in detail about each and individual diseases. So first and foremost, which is considered as immunoglobulin A nephropathy or IgA nephropathy, which is also called as Buerger's nephropathy. So this Buerger's nephropathy is the most common cause for the chronic glomerular disease in the childhood period. As the name suggests, you all know this IgA nephropathy, there is predominance of immunoglobulin A deposits in the mesangial matrix in the absence of systemic disease. So that is very important. It is the most common chronic glomerular disease in children, and if you see, there is predominant IgA deposits, and hence the name IgA deposits in the mesangial matrix in the absence of systemic infection or systemic illness. So this is very important. In the absence of systemic illness, when there is IgA deposits in the mesangium, then it is called as IgA nephropathy or the Buerger's nephropathy. So coming to the genetic causes, like what is the underlying etiology? So it is contributed to the genetic predisposition. So if you see, generally IgA nephropathy, you can see cluster of cases occurring in the family. This familial clustering again signifies that there is a genetic predisposition. So this genetic predisposition is linked to the gene 6q2223 genome. So usually cluster of cases occurs in a family. So this linked to the gene 6q2223 genome, and in general high predisposition to the children living in the Southeast Asia. There is higher prevalence and somewhat lower prevalence or lower incidence in African countries. So if you see, in Southeast Asia, there is a higher prevalence of this IgA nephropathy, whereas in African countries there is lower incidence. It is linked to the gene 6q2223 genome. And in general, if you see, males are more commonly affected compared to females. And often it is benign in nature. So that means it rarely leads to, so end-stage renal disease is rare. Generally, it is a benign nature. So the IgA nephropathy cases leading on to end-stage renal disease condition is rare.